Hopefully I don't have a delay. Hello, Facebook. How you guys doing? I hope all is well. I hope that doesn't go across my screen, but somebody's sending me something, so let me stop that. Make sure, guys, you go ahead and share out this broadcast. I know this is going to be a great conversation tonight. I have Matthew again. As you know, he's one of our resident therapists during the month of April. He will be talking tonight, part two, about dealing with difficult people during quarantine. And I think we said was going to discuss responding versus reacting. Is that right? Did I get that
Yep, that's
right?
right.
Yeah. So tell the people a little bit about you. I'm just going to make sure we're live and everything looks good while you introduce yourself again.
Yep. My name is Matthew Phifer. I'm a therapist in Dallas, Texas. I'm a toxic relationship specialist, so I help people deal with difficult people, regardless if that is a romantic relationship or um, difficult parents, difficult siblings, difficult work environments. Um, for the most part, I help people heal and deal with toxic exes and toxic siblings and toxic family members. But I also do a lot of corporate speaking and basically teach people how to get along with people that are close to impossible or right there with impossible to deal with, including what's called the cluster B spectrum, narcissism, in particular narcissism.
Okay. So guys, you heard all the information here. I have tagged him in the video below. We are using a different system. We had a little problem with Zoom, but we're still on Zoom, but we're just kind of using some different systems. So bear with us. Go ahead and let us know that you can hear us fine though. Let me drop in the comments so I can make sure the comments are coming through. But let's go ahead and get right into this conversation, Matt.
Okay.
What dealing with difficulty people in quarantine. I'm just happy that my house is pretty, pretty peaceful.
Right.
But I have had to have conversations with people in different households that have dealing with difficult people right now. I will say that.
Well, I think so. I think that I mean, even the healthiest of relationships are you can have difficult moments, but the type of relationships that I deal with, are ones that are emotionally abusive, and ones that are consistently toxic, consistently, uh, you know, people who are consistently critical, consistently bringing you down, consistently trying to control you through your emotions. And what makes it the most difficult if you don't understand their tactics, if you don't understand what is actually going on. Um, there's a term called narcissistic supply that
Mm-hmm.
people who are dealing with these people need to be aware of. And the best way that I can describe narcissistic supply is when it is. So for a long time I was a substance abuse therapist,
Okay.
and basically people who are toxic, people who are narcissistic or along that spectrum, they have their own personal drug, which is called narcissistic supply. And that is basically the reason why they're abusing you and the reason why they're so toxic and the reason why they're causing the emotional abuse is because they're feeding off of what I call your reaction and not your response. Because your first reaction, your first snap response is what they're looking for. They're waiting for you. A lot of times people think that they don't want to be cussed out. They don't want to be. They don't want that. They want the reaction. They
Mm-hmm.
want you cussing them out. They want you. They want you to be. They want your emotions to go high. They want you angry because they know that if they can push those buttons of yours, and if they can get that reaction from you, then they can control you. And if I can get you, long story short, if I can control your emotions, then I can control literally anything that you do.
Hmm. So really, so for us emotional people, well, a lot of people don't think I have emotions. I do though. But for the people who are really emotional, what are some of the tips they can do to control their emotions? And guys, as you come into the live, if you have any questions for Matt, make sure you drop them in the comments below.
So you have to go what I call gray rock, where when you have identified that this person is an emotional abuser, that's someone that is that's looking for that reaction, that's constantly pushing your buttons to try to get that reaction from you. You want to respond rather than react, where you're actually putting some thought behind what you're doing, where you're actually walking away instead of giving them that anger or giving them the reactive abuse, where now you're lashing back out at them. Because what they're going to do is, as soon as you start to lash back out at them, gonna flip it around as if you're the one that's abusing them rather than them abusing you. And so going gray rock is when they're pushing your buttons and you're literally not giving that reactive response that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this can only go for a certain amount of time. If you're at this point, you need to start. We talked before about developing an exit plan. You can only go gray rock for so long. There's only so much that you can that one person can put up with, and it won't be long before they actually escalate that emotional abuse to try to get that reaction from you again. Because once again, it's like a drug to them, and if you've taken away that fix from them, they're going to try to escalate to try to get to try to regain that control once again.
Wow. So you called it? Did you say gray rock?
Gray rock, where you're literally like a gray rock, where there's like where they're sitting there, they're pushing your buttons. They could be calling you a name, they can be calling you, and your response might be something along the lines of like, "Wow, that's interesting," or someone might, let's say they call you a bitch. That could be true, and you're like not feeding into that emotional response because, for example, whatever button that they use whatever tactic that they use to try to get that emotional response, you're literally not giving into that whatsoever. Now, the reason, so a lot of people are very resistant to this whenever I first talk to them about it, because it's your natural response that if someone is lashing out at you verbally, for you to lash back out at them. And where I caution people is that might work with someone who is healthy and who has like some emotional intelligence to them. But with someone who is emotionally abusive and they're literally looking for your reaction, it's completely different, where that's what they want. They want the anger. They want the toxicity. They want that from you because they know that if I can control your emotions, then I can control you. And the minute that you do that, then their manipulative tactics are going to continue.
Wow. You have so much. I don't even know what to say. Rashida said these people sound so draining, is what she said. She also said, I'm a proud emotional being as well. I think I'm definitely learning to like grip better, show my emotions, is what I'm trying to say. So, and get them out so people don't think I'm emotionless. I'm a woman. Of course I have emotions.
I'm actually glad that Rashida brought up that they're draining, because that's one of the first things that's one of the first signs that people start to look for and they start to see when they're dealing with these people, is that when you're around them, after a certain amount of time, you're drained.
Yeah.
If you spend a day with your significant other and you feel drained, and when you're with someone that you care about, you should feel like almost empowered, it's like there's a balance, and like you don't feel like you're walking on eggshells. But when you're with someone that is toxic, with someone that's narcissistic, after a certain amount of time, you do feel drained, because people call them emotional vampires. They're literally sucking the energy out of you.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard that before. I mean, that could be somebody that's not even in your relationship, but just a person you may work with, a person that you may interact with in business, in a social setting, etc. Yes, those emotional vampires are just energy vampires. Like, I try to stay away from those folks all day long, but I definitely can see it. It says that Rashida also said it can see a person needing training to be able to master this. So she can see a person needing training to be able to master this. So what are some tips? Like, if you are in this situation, that brings up a good point, Rashida. If you're in a situation and you're quarantined with somebody that's difficult, and you realize that, oh, they're an emotional vampire, or they're draining me every time we have an interaction, what are some of the ways that you can begin to, combat that, or, to keep your energy? I know you're saying don't respond, but I mean, like, what other ways until you can get to that point where you're not responding? I'm thinking.
The first things first is there has to be some self-awareness. What are my triggers? For some people, like, for example, I know a very popular tactic is for someone to accuse someone of being a bad parent, and for someone to place blame whenever something is going wrong with the kids or the household. So when you identify your own personal triggers, you know when they're gonna you know how they're going to attack you, so to speak. And typically there's a pattern with them. And once you've identified that pattern, let's say they typically try to lash out at you, or they typically attack you like in the morning or in the afternoon, and you already know, you basically already know and have already identified what your triggers are, what their patterns are, and when you know, like around the time that they typically to start becoming abusive like this, you can start to anticipate. And when you're able to start to anticipate, you can do things like making sure that you have enough energy, so to speak, to withstand that attack, so to speak. Because one of the things that they like to do, they do like to attack you at times when you're not well rested, when you're just getting home from work, when you've just exhausted yourself at school or exhausted yourself with the kids. Because it goes without saying, everyone knows that if you're drained and if you're not at the top of your game, when you can't really, when you're tired, your thought process isn't even at its peak, so to speak. Right. So you can't even combat everything like at the level that you would when you're well rested. Mm-hmm. So when you know that some of this stuff is coming, and you have that self-awareness to know what your triggers are, when those buttons are pressed and you already know what they're trying to do, then that's when you can respond rather than react, just based on the fact that you know what's coming and you have a little bit more self-awareness of how they're going to attack you.
All right, so more anticipation of yes, right, of what they're getting ready to do, especially if they're doing it around the same time, as soon as you walk in the door, or as soon as they know that you've been like cooking, or you just lay the kids down, or whatever it may be. So,
and some people may, sometimes it comes across as if some people will say, like, where it comes at various times, but you'll notice that there's something similar about the times that they come at you. It might be right before bed, and then it might be also be right before or right after you get home from work. So 2 times when you're really tired. It might be right when you wake up, and then it might be right before so you'll start to notice that even though they may come at you multiple times throughout the day, you might start to notice some patterns throughout those with the time periods that they come at you. So now, once again, once you do start to respond rather than react, they are going to start to change their tactics up, because there's a lot of parallels between toxic behavior and people who are abusing drugs. Mm-hmm. And so, same thing with people who are abusing drugs. If you know that they're stealing things from you, right, which is very common, with people who are abusing drugs, and let's say you lock your things up, they're going to find some other way to be able to get the money that they need to find their fix. And it's very, very similar here. You can go gray rot for a certain period of time, but they're going to start to change those habits and change their tactics up to try to get that emotional response from you, one way or the other.
So they just the endless vampires? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Oh yeah, they're endless. Which is the reason why I encourage finding an exit plan. Mm-hmm. I always encourage going no contact if you can once you do break it off with them. And when you can't go no contact with someone because you share kids with them or because they're a family member, I typically work with people on going what's called low contact, where you're still able to kind of keep your boundaries and keep your distance without allowing their behavior to affect you.
Wow. Okay. So, guys, if you come into the live, we're talking about how to deal with difficult people in quarantine. This is part 2. Hopefully you caught Matthew's live. He's giving us a series on how to really handle difficult relationships. And that could be with your partner, with your parent. It could be with someone you work with. It could be somebody you have to socialize with, somebody you're doing something in the community with. It could be just so many different things. Rashida did have a question, but if you guys have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments, and we'll go ahead and get them answered tonight. And make sure you share out this live. I know I always say this, just to make sure you guys know, you may be okay with this, you may not be dealing with this, but it may be somebody in your timeline that is truly dealing with this, and they need to be able to reach out to Matthew to seek counseling or to get his references for therapy. So make sure you share out this broadcast. That's really critical. So many people are dealing with so many different things as we are in quarantine. So it may
I will
not be
tell
you,
you,
but it may help
I
somebody.
will tell you exactly which friends need it. It's the friends that you were once close with, that you saw consistent, and family members that you saw consistently at one point in time, that all of a sudden now they don't have time for you anymore once they met a certain person, or they're
Mm.
consistently coming to you drained from a certain person or certain people at work. People who are consistently drained or never have time for you because um, I know I'm gonna tick a lot of people off because they're so involved, they're too heavily involved in the church, because
Mm.
churches are can be abusive as well. Um, and so the people that basically have lost their balance with spending time with you, spending time with loved ones, spending time doing things that they love and care about,
Mm.
because of a certain person or a certain atmosphere that is either now new or it doesn't even have to be new. I mean, because some of this abuse could have gone on for several years. I think one of the worst cases that I saw, a woman was married to someone that was abusive for 40 years, and didn't even recognize that it was toxic until she really started talking to me about something else, that she didn't realize that a lot of the behaviors that she was coming to see me about was actually coming from her husband at the time.
Wow. Yeah, you touched on a lot of different things that can be abusive. I didn't even think about, but I always think about balance. We were just talking about that. So funny before we started live, and I was telling you how some things I do to balance. Like I just limit time on things, and I'm like, okay, I'm done with this, no matter if I'm ready to step into something or not, just because that helps me keep balance. But Rashida did have a question, so let me ask her question, and then if anybody else have questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments below. Some of this sounds like that can happen in a relationship normally. How can a person distinguish between someone having these traits versus there are issues in a healthy relationship that needs to be addressed?
I'm glad you brought that up, because even the healthiest relationships have some level of toxicity in it. I
Mm-hmm.
think the biggest difference between someone who is in a complete emotionally abusive and complete toxic relationship is when you literally can't even tell this person no. Where you literally don't have boundaries. You've really kind of lost yourself in this relationship. You've lost yourself in the environment. It could be a work environment where you literally feel like you're walking on eggshells. In a healthy relationship, and let's say that you're in a healthy relationship and you just kind of have a blowout, and both people are kind of calling each other names or whatever, and typically one or both people will apologize and will kind of move forward, and you don't see that cycle, and you don't see that pattern that I was talking about before, that pattern of abuse where it's consistently day in, day out, week in, week out. In a healthy relationship, there's a lot more balance, where you feel like you're not lost in this relationship. You don't feel like you're walking on eggshells, and you have a sense of self, and the other person has a sense of self as well.
Okay. Well, man, where was you at? Like, when I was younger, man, what the heck? That's
I was probably learning this stuff myself,
uh,
my own drama.
you was learning it too, and
Right.
dealing with your own drama. I agree. I'm like always. Every time I talk to you, I just feel like you give us so much knowledge and just so many things of how to handle relationships and how to make sure you're not in a toxic one and how to be in a healthy one and identify different traits. So I appreciate you for sharing. Any other last tips you want to share with us before we go?
I think going back to that last question about how can you tell is I think one of the things is one big thing is what the reaction is going to be when you tell them no. People who are highly toxic, people who are highly abusive and narcissistic, they don't like boundaries, which is the reason why they choose people who have a difficult time saying no, people who are very codependent, and people who have a lot of empathy. And when you do tell these people no, when you do say like, oh, I'm going to go hang out with my friends, I'm going to hang out with my sister tonight, I'm going to tell the church no because I'm going to spend time with my family on Easter or whatever. You typically will see a negative reaction, a negative response, almost like a punishment. I shouldn't even say almost. It'll be like a punishment that's dished out to you.
Mm.
So those are some of the responses that you start to see from these people that are highly toxic, whether it's a person or an environment.
Wow. Okay. Well, man, how can people get in contact with you? Go ahead and drop your information below. Thank you guys for joining in this live today. But how do people reach out to you?
You can always go to mattpfeiffercoaching.com for my website. You can always email me, Matthew Phifer at mattpfeiffercoaching.com. I'm on all social media platforms, Matt Phifer Coaching on Instagram, Facebook, and also Twitter.
Okay. Well, make sure you reach out to Matt if you need any assistance, especially with therapy. He's definitely one of the two people I always recommend when somebody comes to me and they're looking for a therapist. So you're constantly giving out your information. So I know all you guys usually always help the people because I never get a response back like I didn't get help or something. So thank you for always doing that. So I appreciate you for that, and then also joining in the lives in April. So we got about 2 more sessions. I don't know what Matthew's gonna bring next, but Rashida said, "Great job, good info as always." So she said, "Thank you." So yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for this. And then tomorrow we'll have Latasha, so she'll be talking about finance, and then Friday we'll be doing boxing. So we'll be doing an activity. So we're gonna get active too during the quarantine. So we'll have a little bit of everything. If there's any topics you guys want to hear about, please go ahead and drop in the comments below. Again, I'm just doing the month of April, but I could maybe do some sessions maybe in May. So we'll see how long we'll be on quarantine and go from there. So guys, thank you. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you guys later.
See ya.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think it kicked out. I think it's good.